He sold his blood every week, thinking it was the only way to keep his daughter alive until the nurse, who watched him every day, finally told him the truth. His blood was saving his own child's life. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The glass doors of the Riverside Community Blood Donation Center slid open with a gentle hiss. Ethan Moore stepped inside, his work boots leaving small dusty marks on the pristine floor. The familiar antiseptic smell hit his nostrils as he pulled a crumpled doctor's letter from his jacket pocket, smoothing it against his leg. The waiting room was quiet except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. A few other donors sat scattered in the blue plastic chairs, flipping through old magazines or scrolling on their phones. Ethan made his way to the front desk, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion from his early morning shift at the construction site. "Mr. Moore." The receptionist greeted him with a knowing smile. Right on schedule, he managed a tired smile in return. "Like clockwork, Jenny." His weekly visits had become so routine that the staff knew him by name. As he signed in, his hand trembled slightly, a reminder that maybe he should have eaten more than just coffee and toast for breakfast. But groceries were tight this week, and Lily's medication came first. The letter in his pocket felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Dr. Harrison's words jumped out at him. Additional treatment required, significant costs. Without immediate intervention, he pushed the thoughts away and focused on filling out the donor form, checking the same boxes he'd checked every week for the past year. From behind the nurse's station, Clara Benson watched him with careful eyes. She'd been observing his weekly visits for months now, noting how his face grew a little paler, his movements a bit slower each time. Her fingers itched to pull his medical file, to understand why someone would push themselves to donate so frequently, but professional boundaries held her back. Ethan settled into one of the donation chairs, rolling up the sleeve of his faded work shirt. The fabric was worn thin at the elbows, but it was clean. He always made sure of that. As he waited, his hand drifted to his other pocket, where he kept Lily's card. He pulled it out carefully, smiling at the crooked hearts and rainbow-colored letters. "Get better soon, everybody." The card read in his daughter's wobbly handwriting, "Thank you for helping people." She'd drawn stick figures of doctors and nurses, and what looked like superheroes wearing capes made of Band-Aids. A lump formed in his throat. Lily didn't know these weekly visits were about more than just helping others. She didn't know that the modest compensation for his plasma donations was sometimes all that stood between her having medicine and going without. Clara approached his chair, her white shoes silent on the linoleum floor. "Good morning, Mr. Moore," she said, her voice professional but gentle. "How are you feeling today?" "I'm fine," he answered automatically, though the dark circles under his eyes told a different story. She wrapped the blood pressure cuff around his arm, her movements efficient but careful. "Your pressure's a little low today," she noted, frowning slightly. "Just tired from work," he said quickly. "Been pulling extra shifts." Clara nodded, but her concern was visible in the slight furrow of her brow. She'd seen his donation records, weekly visits for nearly 12 months straight. It wasn't technically against the rules, but it pushed the limits of what was healthy. As she prepared the needle, Ethan closed his eyes briefly. The image of Lily's face floated in his mind. Her brave smile as she took her morning medications, the way she never complained even on her worst days. 2 years ago, when Sarah passed away from cancer, he'd promised his wife he'd take care of their little girl. Some days, like today, it felt impossible to keep that promise. The needle slid in with practiced precision. Clara hung the collection bag and adjusted the flow rate. "Try to relax," she advised. "It helps the process go faster." Ethan nodded, his fingers absently tracing the edges of Lily's card. The paper was soft from being handled so much, the corners slightly worn. He thought about her at school right now, probably working on her math problems or reading a story in class. She was so bright, so full of life despite her illness. The minutes ticked by slowly. Other donors came and went. The television mounted on the wall played muted news segment. Clara moved between patients with quiet efficiency, but she kept glancing back at Ethan, noting how he seemed to sink deeper into the chair as the donation progressed. When the bag was finally full, Clara returned to remove the needle. "You should rest here for a few extra minutes," she suggested, pressing a gauze pad to his arm. "Can't," Ethan said, already pushing himself up. "Need to get back to work." His movement was too quick. The room swayed, and he gripped the armrest to steady himself. Clara's hand shot out to support his elbow. "Please, Mr. Moore," she said, her professional distance cracking slightly. "Just 5 minutes. Doctor's orders. He relented, sinking back into the chair. Clara brought him a small cup of orange juice and a package of crackers. These aren't optional, she added firmly. As Ethan slowly ate the crackers, his hand drifted back to his pocket, touching Lily's card like a talisman. The processing center would mail the compensation check in a few days, just enough to cover this month's prescription copay. He'd figure out the rest somehow. He always did. Finally, when Clara was satisfied he could stand without falling, she walked him to the front desk. He collected his receipt and turned toward the exit, his steps measured and careful. The afternoon sun streamed through the glass doors as Ethan pushed them open. His arm ached where the needle had been, and fatigue weighed on him like a heavy blanket. But in his pocket, Lily's card reminded him why he'd be back next week, and the week after that, for as long as it took. The doors slid closed behind him, and Clara watched him go, holding a folder marked "Confidential" close to her chest, her expression thoughtful and concerned. Clara Benson watched through the center's front window as Ethan Moore's figure grew smaller in the distance. His shoulders were slumped, and his steps were slower than usual today. She pressed her lips together, fighting the urge to call him back and insist he rest longer after the donation. With practiced movements, she began her cleanup routine. The donation chair still held the warmth from where he'd Saturday. She stripped off the protective covering, balled it up, and dropped it into the medical waste bin. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar motions, but her mind wandered to the file sitting on her desk. Just one more check, she whispered to herself, though she knew every detail by heart. In her small office, Clara pulled out Ethan's donor file. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she flipped through the pages. Weekly donations, like clockwork, for the past year. Never missed an appointment. Never complained about the needles. Never asked for special treatment. The margins of his paperwork were filled with her own neat handwriting. Slight pallor noted, recommend iron supplements. Patient insists on continuing despite advice to rest. Clara ran her finger down the dates. Most donors came in sporadically, maybe once every few months. But Ethan was different. He pushed the absolute limits of how often he could safely donate. Always exactly on the first day he became eligible again. She pulled out her desk chair and sat down heavily, the worn cushion sighing beneath her. The medical payment receipts told their own story, each one, immediately cashed, never letting a single day's delay pass. "What drives you, Ethan Moore?" she murmured, studying his intake photo. His eyes held a determination that seemed at odds with his gentle demeanor. Clara stood up and walked to the supply closet, gathering cleaning supplies. As she wiped down the donation chairs and equipment, her mind kept circling back to him. In her 15 years as a nurse, she'd seen all types of donors. The college students who came for quick cash, the retirees who donated out of civic duty, the regulars who treated it like a social club. But Ethan was different. There was something in the way he carried himself, a quiet dignity despite his obvious exhaustion. He never complained about the long waits or the paperwork. He just sat there, sometimes closing his eyes, holding what looked like a child's drawing or card. Today's card had caught her eye, bright crayon colors peeking out from his jacket pocket. She'd glimpsed a child's handwriting, "Get well soon." The paper was worn at the edges, as if handled many times. Clara moved to the front desk, organizing the next day's files. She shouldn't be this invested in a donor's personal life. It wasn't professional, but she couldn't help wondering about that card, about the story behind those weekly visits. Through the window, she could still make out Ethan's figure in the distance. He'd stopped at the bus stop, sitting heavily on the bench. Even from here, she could see him pull out the card, looking at it with what seemed like both love and sadness. The sight made her chest tighten. Who was this little girl who wrote him notes? Why did he push himself so hard, week after week? The payment for donations wasn't much, barely enough to cover groceries for a few days. Clara turned away from the window, trying to focus on her closing duties, but her eyes kept drifting to Ethan's file on her desk. She knew she was crossing a line, getting emotionally involved with a donor story. It went against everything she'd been taught about maintaining professional boundaries. But there was something about Ethan Moore that called to her nurturing instincts. Maybe it was the way he always said thank you with such sincerity, or how he never complained about the pain, though she could see him wincing sometimes. Or perhaps it was those cards he carried, little pieces of love that seemed to give him strength. She finished her cleanup routine and gathered her things to leave. As she locked up the center, she made a mental note of his next appointment date, already knowing she'd be watching for him, worried about his health, curious about his story. The evening air was cooling as Clara walked to her car. She could no longer see Ethan at the bus stop, but the image of him reading that small card stayed with her. Somewhere out there was a little girl who drew pictures and wrote notes to this man who gave so much of himself, week after week. "Who are you?" she whispered to the empty parking lot, thinking of the child's handwriting. "What makes your daddy push himself so hard?" The morning sun cast long shadows across the donation center's parking lot as Ethan trudged toward the entrance. His work boots scraped against the concrete, each step heavy with exhaustion. Another week, another donation. He reached for the door handle, but stopped short when he saw Clara standing there, waiting. "Mr. Moore," she said softly, "could you come with me for a moment?" Something in her tone made him pause. Clara usually maintained a professional distance, but today her eyes held an intensity he'd never seen before. She led him to a small consultation room off the main hallway, closing the door behind them. "Please, sit down," she gestured to one of the chairs. Ethan lowered himself into the chair, his muscles still aching from yesterday's double shift at work. "Is something wrong? Did my last screening show a problem?" Clara shook her head, settling into the chair across from him. She held a thick manila folder in her hands, her fingers tapping nervously against its edges. "No, nothing's wrong. In fact," she took a deep breath, "I need to tell you something important about your donations." Ethan's heart rate picked up. Was he being turned away from the program? The thought sent a spike of panic through him. He needed this income for Lily's medications. "Your blood donations," Clara continued, her voice gentle but firm, "have been saving a life. A very specific life." She opened the folder and pulled out a document. "Your daughter's life." The words hit him like a physical force. "What?" he whispered. "Lily," Clara said, watching his face carefully. "Your blood has been used in her experimental treatments at Memorial Hospital. You've been helping her fight this disease without even knowing it." Ethan's hands began to shake. He gripped the arms of the chair to steady them. "But how?" "There's a confidential donor match program," Clara explained, spreading out several papers on the small table between them. "Your blood type and specific antibodies, they're exactly what Lily needs. The treatments she's been receiving, they're derived from your plasma donations." The room seemed to spin slightly. Ethan closed his eyes, memories flooding back, all those times he'd sat in the donation chair, thinking only of the small payment that would help buy Lily's medicines. All along, his very blood had been flowing back to her, fighting alongside her. "I don't understand," he said, opening his eyes. "Why wasn't I told?" Clara's expression softened with sympathy. "It's part of the program's protocols. Donors aren't supposed to know the recipients, even in cases like this. It's meant to protect everyone involved." She hesitated. "I'm actually breaking several rules by telling you this now." Ethan leaned forward, staring at the papers before him. Medical charts, treatment protocols, dates that matched his donation schedule perfectly. All this, time. His voice cracked. "Every week, I've been." "You've been saving her," Clara finished quietly, in the most direct way possible. Tears pricked at Ethan's eyes. He thought of Lily's latest checkup, how her doctor had seemed cautiously optimistic about her progress. He'd attributed it to her medications, never imagining that his own blood was part of the treatment. "The treatments are experimental," Clara continued, "but they're working. Your consistent donations have been crucial. The doctors have been able to develop a specialized therapy using your plasma because you're not just a match, you're her father. The genetic connection makes a difference." Ethan picked up one of the papers with trembling hands, seeing Lily's name at the top. His daughter's medical history laid out in stark medical terminology, intersecting with his own donation records in a pattern he'd never known existed. "I can't tell you more details about the program," Clara said apologetically. "There are legal restrictions, and I'm already risking my position by sharing this much. But I felt you needed to know. Your sacrifice. It's been more meaningful than you realized." Ethan nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The weight of this revelation pressed on his chest, but it wasn't crushing. It was lifting something inside him, replacing despair with purpose. "Thank you," he finally managed, "for telling me." Clara gathered the papers back into the folder. "We should proceed with today's donation now. But I wanted you to understand, every time you walk through that door, you're doing more than earning a payment. You're giving Lily exactly what she needs to fight this disease." They stood, and Ethan swayed slightly, overwhelmed. Clara steadied him with a gentle hand on his arm. "Are you okay to donate today?" she asked. "We can reschedule if you need time to process this." Ethan shook his head firmly. "No, I want to do it now." Knowing this, knowing it's going to her, he straightened his shoulders. "I've never been more ready." As they walked to the donation area, Ethan's steps felt lighter despite his physical exhaustion. The familiar sight of the donation chair no longer filled him with resignation. Instead, he saw it as a connection, a direct line of hope from his heart to Lily's. He settled into the chair, rolling up his sleeve with new purpose. As Clara prepared the collection equipment, he pulled Lily's latest card from his pocket. The crayon drawings seemed to shine brighter now, the wobbly "I love you, Daddy" carrying deeper meaning. The needle slid into his arm, and Ethan watched the dark red liquid begin to flow. His blood, going to save his little girl. No longer was this just about scraping together money for her care. Every drop was a gift, a father's love made tangible, flowing directly to where it was needed most. Clara adjusted the equipment, her movements efficient but gentle. "Remember," she said softly, "I can't give you any more details about the program. As far as anyone else knows, you're still just a regular donor." Ethan nodded, clutching Lily's card. He didn't need more details. Knowing his sacrifice had such direct meaning was enough. For the first time in months, real hope bloomed in his chest. Each beat of his heart seemed to whisper his daughter's name, pumping life and healing through the tubes that would carry his blood to her. Clara's shoes clicked against the polished hospital floor as she made her way to the director's office. Her stomach churned with anxiety, but she kept her head high. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows did little to warm the chill that had settled in her chest since receiving the summons. The hospital director, Dr. Phillips, sat behind his mahogany desk, his silver-rimmed glasses reflecting the glow of his computer screen. He didn't look up when Clara entered, making her wait as he finished typing something. "Sit down, Miss Benson," he said, finally, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Clara smoothed her scrubs and took a seat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from fidgeting. "I understand you disclosed confidential information to a donor yesterday." "Doctor," Phillips removed his glasses and fixed her with a stern look. "Do you realize the severity of this breach in protocol?" "Sir, Clara started, but he held up a hand to silence her. "This isn't just about privacy laws, Miss Benson. This is about the integrity of our entire donor program." He picked up a thick folder from his desk. "Ethan Moore's file. A dedicated donor, yes, but that doesn't give you the right to share information about his daughter's treatment." Clara's throat tightened. "I thought he had a right to know." His donations were directly helping his daughter. "That's precisely the problem, Doctor." Phillips leaned forward, his expression hardening. "What if this information affects his future donations? What if it compromises the clinical trial? Have you considered the legal implications?" The weight of her actions pressed down on Clara's shoulders. She hadn't considered all these possibilities when she'd made the split-second decision to tell Ethan. "I'm placing a formal warning in your file, Doctor." Phillips continued. "Any further breaches will result in immediate termination. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, sir." Clara's voice came out barely above a whisper. "You're an excellent nurse, Clara. Don't let your compassion cloud your professional judgment." His tone softened slightly. "We have these protocols for a reason." Back at her station, Clara went through the motions of her daily tasks, but her mind kept drifting to Ethan. She'd seen the hope bloom in his eyes yesterday when she told him about Lily's treatments. How could something that felt so right be considered wrong? During her lunch break, she spotted Ethan in the hospital cafeteria. He was sitting alone, stirring a cup of coffee absently, lost in thought. The sight of him made her heart ache. He looked different today, straighter shoulders, clearer eyes, like a man who'd found his purpose. Clara watched as he pulled out his wallet and carefully counted some change. A father doing everything he could for his daughter, and now he knew his sacrifices weren't in vain. How could the hospital expect her to keep that knowledge from him? The afternoon dragged on, each minute feeling like an hour. Clara's hand shook slightly as she filled out donor forms, remembering Dr. Phillips's warning. One more mistake and she'd lose her job. But every time she thought about backing away, she remembered Lily's sweet face in the family photo she'd seen in Ethan's file. At 5 o'clock, Clara sat in her car in the hospital parking lot, her keys dangling unused in the ignition. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, but she barely noticed its beauty. Her mind was too full of the day's events, of protocols and warnings, of a father's love and a daughter's need. She'd crossed a line. She knew that now, but as she thought about Ethan and Lily, she realized she couldn't step back over it. Whatever consequences came, she had to see this through. The hospital might have its rules, but sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking them. Clara's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. She'd made her choice. She couldn't abandon Ethan and Lily now, not when they needed her most. Her job might be at risk, but some things were worth fighting for. The warning in her file felt like a weight in her chest, but it wasn't enough to make her regret her decision. She'd told Ethan the truth, and now she had to live with the consequences. Whatever came next, she would face it, knowing she'd followed her heart. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the parking lot, Clara remained in her car, caught between duty and compassion, between protocols and human connection. The path ahead wasn't clear, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. The afternoon, sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, casting warm patches across the sterile floor of Dr. Patel's office. Ethan sat on the edge of his chair, his work-worn hands clasped tightly in his lap as he listened to the doctor explain Lily's latest test results. "Mr. Moore, doctor," Patel said, her dark eyes bright with optimism. "Lily's numbers are showing significant improvement. The experimental treatment using your blood donations appears to be working better than we initially hoped." Ethan's face broke into a smile, the kind that reached all the way to his tired eyes. "Really? You mean she's getting better?" Dr. Patel nodded, turning her computer screen so Ethan could see the charts, though they were just colorful lines and numbers to him. "Her immune response is stronger, and the inflammation markers are down considerably. We believe this remission could last longer than our previous estimates." Ethan's chest felt lighter than it had in months. He thought of Lily at home with their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, probably working on her homework or drawing another of her colorful pictures. "How much longer?" "It's difficult to say exactly, Doctor," Patel replied, her voice careful but encouraging. "But if these trends continue, we might be looking at months rather than weeks. Your weekly donations have been crucial to this success, Mr. Moore." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed by the news. "I'll keep donating as long as she needs it, whatever it takes." After leaving Dr. Patel's office, Ethan headed straight to the donation center for his regular appointment. The familiar antiseptic smell greeted him as he pushed through the glass doors, but today it didn't seem as harsh. The waiting room looked brighter somehow, more hopeful. Clara was at her usual station, organizing supplies. When she saw him, her face softened into a warm smile. "Ethan, you're early today." "Just came from Dr. Patel's office," he said, unable to keep the joy from his voice. "Lily's numbers are up. The treatment's working better than they expected." Clara's eyes lit up. "That's wonderful news." She gestured for him to follow her to the donation chair. As she prepared the equipment with practiced efficiency, she spoke in a lower voice. "Actually, I've been wanting to tell you something too." Ethan settled into the familiar chair, rolling up his sleeve. "What is it?" Clara glanced around before continuing, her movements deliberate as she cleaned his arm with an alcohol swab. "I've been in meetings with the hospital board. There's talk about expanding the donor program. If it goes through, we could help more children like Lily." "Really?" Ethan watched as she inserted the needle with expert precision. "How many more?" "Potentially dozens," Clara said, adjusting the flow rate. "The success we've seen with Lily's case has caught their attention. They're considering allocating more resources to the program." Ethan felt a surge of emotion. That would be amazing. "I know what it's like, feeling helpless while your child is sick. If other families could get the same chance." Clara nodded, checking the collection bag. "It's still in the early stages, but I wanted you to know. Your dedication, coming here week after week, it's helping prove how valuable this program is." They shared a moment of comfortable silence, broken only by the soft beeping of the donation equipment. Ethan noticed how the afternoon light caught Clara's hair, giving it a golden glow. She had been such a steady presence these past months, always professional but kind, making these difficult times a little easier to bear. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything you've done for us." Clara adjusted the tube slightly, her hands gentle and sure. "I'm just doing my job, Ethan." "No," he shook his head. "It's more than that. You've given us hope when we needed it most." A slight blush colored Clara's cheeks as she checked his vitals. "Well, you're the one doing all the hard work. I'm just here to make sure you don't pass out." They both chuckled, and Ethan felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the hospital's heating system. For the first time in ages, he felt like he was part of something bigger than his own struggles. As he left the donation center later that afternoon, Ethan passed through the hospital's main lobby. A group of parents sat with their children in the waiting area. Some of the kids were clearly patients, others presumably siblings. One little girl, about Lily's age, was showing her mother a drawing while receiving an IV treatment. Another child was laughing at something on his father's phone, momentarily forgetting the bandages on his arm. Ethan paused, watching them. These families were fighting their own battles, carrying their own hopes and fears. But there was something beautiful in their resilience, in the way they found moments of joy, even here in the hospital. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan felt a flutter of excitement about the future. Not just for Lily's improving health, but for all the possibilities that lay ahead. The expanded donor program could help so many families like his own. Maybe their struggle could become part of something larger, something that could bring hope to others. As he pushed through the hospital doors into the late afternoon sunshine, Ethan felt lighter, stronger. The weight of being a single father, of Lily's illness, hadn't disappeared, but somehow it felt more manageable. Today, hope didn't feel like a distant dream, but like something real and tangible. As real as the bandage on his arm where he'd given his donation. Clara stared at her computer screen, her fingers frozen over the keyboard. The hospital administration's email glowed harsh and cold. Due to budget constraints, the experimental blood donor program will be discontinued, effective end of next month. All current patients will be transitioned to standard care protocols. Her stomach twisted into knots. She thought about Lily's improving condition, about Ethan's weekly visits, about all the progress they'd made. With trembling hands, she picked up her coffee mug, but it slipped through her fingers, shattering on the floor. "Everything okay?" Sarah, another nurse, called from the front desk. "Just clumsy," Clara replied, her voice tight. As she cleaned up the mess, her mind raced. How could she tell Ethan? The donor program wasn't just about money anymore, it was Lily's lifeline. Throughout her morning shift, Clara watched the clock, dreading Ethan's scheduled appointment. When he walked in at his usual time, his face bright with hope, her heart sank even further. "Morning, Clara," he said, rolling up his sleeve. "Lily made you something." He pulled out a crayon drawing of what looked like 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, and one small. Clara's hands shook as she took the drawing. "Ethan, I need to tell you something." His smile faded as she explained about the email. The color drained from his face, but his jaw set with determination. "There has to be something we can do," he said. "We can't just let them shut it down. The hospital needs funding," Clara explained. "Without it, they can't continue the experimental treatments." Ethan stood up, pacing the small donation room. "Then we'll find the funding. This isn't just about Lily anymore. There are other families who could benefit from this program." Over the next few days, Ethan threw himself into action. Clara watched as he visited local churches, speaking to congregations about the importance of the donor program. He reached out to veteran groups, explaining how their contributions could save lives. He even convinced the local coffee shop to put up posters advertising a fundraising event. Clara found herself helping despite her professional reservations. During her lunch breaks, she'd make calls to local businesses, asking for support. After work, she'd help Ethan distribute flyers at the community center. She knew she was walking a dangerous line. The hospital administration wouldn't approve of her involvement, but she couldn't stand by and watch the program die. The First Baptist Church agreed to host the fundraiser. Ethan told her one afternoon, his eyes bright with purpose. "And the VFW Post is sending representatives. People are starting to listen, Clara." She nodded, trying to match his enthusiasm while pushing down her worry. "That's wonderful. But Ethan, the hospital needs substantial funding. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars." "Then we'll find it," he said with quiet determination. "When Lily was born, the doctors said she wouldn't make it past her first birthday. But she did. When Sarah, my wife, passed away, they said I couldn't manage being a single dad with a sick child. But I did. Sometimes faith and hard work can move mountains." His words touched something deep inside Clara. She found herself working harder, staying up late to research grant opportunities and potential donors. The hospital director had already given her one warning about getting too involved with patients, but she couldn't step away now. One evening, as they prepared for the upcoming fundraiser, Clara and Ethan stood in the hospital parking lot, sorting through boxes of promotional materials. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, casting long shadows across the asphalt. "Do you really think we can do this?" Clara asked softly, arranging pamphlets about the donor program. Ethan paused, looking at her in the fading light. "I have to believe we can. Not just for Lily, but for all the other families who need this program. Clara nodded, understanding the weight of their task. They were up against hospital bureaucracy, budget constraints, and time itself. But watching Ethan's unwavering determination, she felt a flutter of hope in her chest. The presentation boards are ready for tomorrow, she said, closing the trunk of her car. I printed extra copies of the testimonials from other families in the program. Thank you, Clara, Ethan said quietly. Not just for this, but for everything. For telling me the truth about my donations, helping Lily, for risking your job to help us. I know it's not easy for you. Clara looked down at the box in her hands, feeling the weight of his gratitude. Some things are worth the risk, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. They stood there in the growing darkness, surrounded by boxes and flyers, both aware of the enormous challenge ahead of them. The hospital's deadline loomed like a shadow, but in that moment, their shared purpose gave them strength. Tomorrow would bring the fundraiser, their first major attempt to save the program. Neither of them spoke about what would happen if they failed. Instead, they continued working in companionable silence, preparing for the battle ahead. The parking lot lights flickered on, casting a harsh fluorescent glow over their preparations. Clara glanced at her watch, knowing she should head home, but finding herself reluctant to leave. We should double-check the presentation order for tomorrow, she said, pulling out the schedule. Ethan nodded, moving closer to see the paper in the dim light. Together, they reviewed their plans for the fundraiser, their voices low and determined in the quiet evening air. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Ethan and Clara taped another flyer to the window of Johnson's hardware store. Save Our Blood Donor Program blazed across the top in bold letters, with details about the upcoming fundraiser underneath. That's the 20th store this morning, Clara said, smoothing down a corner of the flyer. She wore casual clothes instead of her usual scrubs, trying to keep her involvement subtle. How many more do we have? Ethan checked the stack in his arms. About 30. But Mr. Peterson at the diner said he'd put some by his register too. They walked down the sidewalk together, their footsteps in sync. The street was coming alive with morning traffic, and several people waved as they passed. Ethan stopped at Pete's coffee shop, where the owner immediately welcomed them in. Of course I'll help, Pete said, his weathered face creasing into a smile. My grandson needed blood transfusions when he was born premature. Put the flyers right here by the register, and I'll tell everyone who comes in. Clara watched as Ethan explained the program to Pete, his voice steady and passionate. It's not just about the donations, he said. It's about giving hope to families who are fighting every day to keep their children alive. They spent the next few hours visiting more businesses. At the Veterans Center, they found unexpected support. A group of former service members gathered around as Ethan shared his story. Blood donations saved my life in Afghanistan, said one veteran, standing tall despite his prosthetic leg. Count us in. We'll spread the word through our network. The veterans offered their hall for meetings and promised to bring their families to the fundraiser. One of them, a retired sergeant named Mike, pulled out his phone right there and started calling his contacts. By mid-afternoon, Clara's feet ached, but her heart felt lighter than it had in days. She watched Ethan talking to a group of mothers outside the elementary school, his hands moving expressively as he spoke. The women nodded, reaching for the flyers and promising to share them with their PTAs and church groups. You're good at this, Clara said as they walked to their next stop. The way you connect with people, they really listen to you. Ethan shook his head modestly. I'm just telling the truth. Every parent understands what it means to want to protect their child. At the local radio station, the afternoon DJ invited Ethan to speak on air. Clara stood behind the glass, watching as Ethan leaned into the microphone, his voice clear and strong. I'm not asking for handouts, he said. I'm asking for our community to stand together. This program doesn't just help my daughter. It helps all our children who might need it someday. We can't let it disappear. Phone calls started coming in before he even finished speaking. People offered donations, volunteered to help, and shared their own stories of how blood donations had touched their lives. The momentum built throughout the week. Clara watched in amazement as more volunteers joined their cause. They created social media pages, organized bake sales, and planned auction items for the fundraiser. Local businesses donated goods and services to be raffled off. Finally, the night of the fundraiser arrived. Clara stood at the entrance of the church hall, greeting people as they streamed in. The space, which had seemed too ambitious when they'd booked it, was quickly filling up. Tables lined the walls, loaded with donated items for the silent auction. Children ran around selling raffle tickets, their energy infectious. The smell of home-cooked food filled the air as volunteers set up the potluck dinner. Ethan moved through the crowd, shaking hands and thanking people for coming. He looked different tonight, standing straighter, his eyes bright with purpose. When he passed near Clara, she could see the emotion on his face as he took in the scene. Veterans in their service caps sat alongside young families. Teachers chatted with business owners. The mayor himself had shown up, wearing a Save Our Donor Program button on his lapel. At one point, Ethan found himself center stage, looking out at the sea of familiar faces. The hall fell quiet as he began to speak, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. He told them about the program, about the children it helped, about the difference it made in countless lives. "Look around," he said, gesturing to the packed hall. "This is what community means. This is what hope looks like." Clara stood at the back of the room, watching the crowd respond to his words. She saw heads nodding, saw people reaching for tissues, saw them reaching for their checkbooks. The surge of support was overwhelming, a wave of humanity at its finest. As Ethan finished speaking, the applause was deafening. He stepped down from the stage, and immediately people surrounded him, wanting to help, wanting to be part of something bigger than themselves. Clara caught his eye across the room. For a moment, they shared a look of pure amazement at what they had helped create. The church hall wasn't just full of people, it was full of possibility, full of the kind of hope that could move mountains. They had started this campaign with just 2 people and a stack of flyers. Now, looking at the crowd of supporters, Ethan could barely believe how far they'd come. Each person in that room represented a thread in a tapestry of community support, woven together by compassion and common purpose. Clara's hands trembled as she smoothed her uniform before entering her supervisor's office. The morning light filtered through the Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across Mrs. Henderson's stern face. "Please, take a seat, Clara." Mrs. Henderson gestured to the chair across from her desk. The leather creaked as Clara sat down, her heart pounding against her ribs. "I'll get straight to the point." Mrs. Henderson folded her hands on the desk. "Despite Mr. Moore's admirable efforts with the community campaign, the board has made their decision. The donor program will be temporarily shut down, effective immediately." Clara felt the air leave her lungs. "But the children who depend on it, this isn't up for discussion." Mrs. Henderson's voice was firm but not unkind. "The financial constraints are too severe. We simply can't sustain the program any longer." Clara thought of Ethan's tired but hopeful face at yesterday's fundraiser. The church hall had been packed with supporters, their voices full of determination. Now it all seemed futile. "What about the current patients?" Clara asked, though she already dreaded the answer. "They'll be transitioned to alternative treatments where possible." Mrs. Henderson pulled out a thick folder, which brings me to another matter, the Moore case. Clara's fingers dug into the armrests of her chair. The program was never intended for long-term treatment. Mrs. Henderson's words fell like stones. The blood used in these experimental trials was a limited resource. We were clear about this in the original documentation. "But Lily," Clara started. "I understand your attachment to the case, Clara, but this is precisely why we have protocols about maintaining professional distance." Clara found Ethan in the waiting room 20 minutes later. He sat with his usual quiet dignity, a newspaper spread across his lap. The headline about their fundraising efforts now seemed like a cruel joke. "Ethan," she said softly, "we need to talk." They walked to the small courtyard behind the center. The morning was bright and crisp, mocking the darkness of the news she had to deliver. "They're shutting it down?" Ethan's voice was hollow after Clara finished explaining. He ran a hand through his hair, his shoulders slumping. "But the fundraiser, everyone who helped." "I'm so sorry," Clara's voice cracked. "There's more." She watched the color drain from his face as she explained about the program's temporary nature, about how Lily's treatment had never been meant to be ongoing. "What are you saying?" Ethan's words came out barely above a whisper. "Without the program." Clara forced herself to continue. "Lily's treatment might end soon, unless we can find another solution." Ethan pressed his palms against his eyes. "I don't understand. Everything was working. She was getting better. The blood used in the trials." Clara's throat felt tight. "It was a limited resource. They never intended it to be a permanent solution." "A limited resource?" Ethan's voice rose slightly. "You mean my blood? I'm right here. I'll keep donating. I'll sign whatever they need." "It's not that simple." Clara wished she could make him understand. The experimental treatment involved more than just regular donations. The program was specifically designed to what? Ethan cut in, his voice sharp with desperation. To give us hope and then take it away? Clara had no answer. They stood in silence, watching a pair of sparrows hop across the courtyard's brick path. What am I supposed to tell her? Ethan's voice broke. How do I tell my little girl that Daddy can't help her anymore? Clara reached out to touch his arm, but he pulled away, turning toward the parking lot. I need some time, he mumbled. Clara watched as he walked to his car, his steps heavy and uneven. He sat behind the wheel but didn't start the engine. Through the windshield, she could see his head bowed, his shoulders shaking slightly. She wanted to go to him, to tell him they would find another way, but she knew he needed this moment alone. Still, she couldn't leave without saying one last thing. Walking to his car, she tapped gently on the window. Ethan looked up, his eyes red but dry. You haven't lost yet, she said firmly. He stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel. The crushing weight of failure seemed to press him into the seat. But Clara's words hung in the air between them, a tiny spark in the darkness. Clara stepped back, watching as Ethan sat motionless in his car, the morning sun climbing higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. Clara's fingers traced over the dusty hospital archives, her eyes scanning through old files in the dimly lit records room. She'd come here during her lunch break, searching for answers about the donor program's history. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she pulled out another box of records. Then she saw it. Her brother, James's name jumped out from a yellowed folder. She blinked, making sure she wasn't seeing things. But there it was, blood donation records from 5 years ago, before he died in that terrible car accident. Clara's hand shook as she read through the details. James had been part of an early trial for the same treatment protocol now being used for Lily. His blood type and genetic markers had helped establish the baseline for the current program. Clara's heart skipped a beat as she compared his medical data to Ethan's file. Oh my God, she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. The genetic markers matched. As James's sister, there was a strong chance she carried the same markers. She slumped back in her chair, mind racing. This could be the answer they needed. But sharing this information could cost her more than just her job. It could lead to legal trouble. The hospital had strict protocols about genetic matching and donation procedures. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her quickly stuff the files back into their boxes. She couldn't let anyone know what she'd discovered. Not yet. Later that afternoon, Clara watched through the donation center window as Ethan paced in the parking lot, talking on his phone. His shoulders were tense, his free hand running through his hair in frustration. When he came inside, his face was drawn with worry. I've been calling hospitals in California, he said, dropping into the chair beside her desk. There's a research center in San Francisco that might be able to help Lily, but we'd have to move there for at least 6 months. Clara's heart clenched. Ethan, that's such a big change. What about your job? Lily's school? None of that matters if I can't keep her alive. His voice cracked. I'll sell everything, live in my car if I have to. He pressed his palms against his eyes. I can't lose her too. Clara glanced around the empty donation center. It was nearly closing time, and they were alone. She took a deep breath, knowing what she had to do. There might be another way, she said softly, but you have to promise to keep what I'm about to tell you absolutely confidential. Ethan looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but alert. What do you mean? Clara pulled out a chair and sat across from him. I was going through some old records today. My brother James, he died 5 years ago. He was part of the original trial that developed Lily's current treatment protocol. She watched as understanding slowly dawned on Ethan's face. His blood helped create the matching criteria they use now, and since I'm his sister. You might be a match, Ethan finished, his voice barely a whisper. It's not guaranteed, Clara cautioned, seeing the hope lighting up his eyes. But there's a good chance I carry the same genetic markers that made James's donations so effective. Ethan shook his head, looking dazed. But wouldn't the hospital already know this? Why haven't they? Because they're not looking for it, Clara explained. The records are old, filed away in archives. And honestly, they probably never thought to check for a family connection. It wasn't part of the standard protocol. She leaned forward, lowering her voice even though they were alone. Listen, Ethan, this has to stay between us. If the hospital finds out I access these records or that I'm suggesting this outside proper channels, I understand, he said quickly. But Clara, are you sure? This could cost you your job. I'm sure about one thing. she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. I'm not going to stand by and watch Lily suffer when I might be able to help. Ethan ran his hands over his face, looking overwhelmed. This seems too good to be true. What if it doesn't work? What if something goes wrong? Then we'll face that together, Clara said firmly. But I promise you, Ethan, I will do everything in my power to make sure Lily gets the treatment she needs. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of possibility and risk. Through the window, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, casting long shadows across the empty donation center. In that quiet moment, both Clara and Ethan knew their lives were about to change dramatically, for better or worse. Ethan finally spoke, his voice rough with emotion. I don't know how to thank you for even trying. Don't thank me yet, Clara said, gathering the files and carefully tucking them away. We have a lot of work to do, and we'll need to be very careful about how we proceed. The evening sun cast long shadows across the empty hospital parking lot as Clara waited by her car. Her heart raced every time headlights swept past, worried someone might recognize her. She checked her watch again, 7:45 p.m. The parking lot was nearly deserted at this hour, perfect for their clandestine meeting. Ethan's familiar figure appeared around the corner, his shoulders hunched against the cool evening breeze. Clara waved him over, glancing around one more time to ensure they were alone. Thanks for meeting me here, she said softly as he approached. I couldn't risk talking about this inside the hospital. Ethan nodded, his face etched with worry lines. Is everything okay? Did you find something about the program? Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself against her car. I found more than that. I found hope. She pulled out a manila folder from her bag. My brother James, he was a donor here 5 years ago, before he passed away. His blood type and genetic markers were compatible with the treatment protocol they're using for Lily. Ethan's brow furrowed as he tried to understand. What does that mean? It means, Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper, that I might be able to donate blood for Lily's treatment. My brother and I shared similar genetic markers. There's a good chance I could be compatible. Ethan stared at her, stunned. But your job, the hospital regulations? I know. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the folder tighter. I could lose my license, but I can't stand by and watch Lily suffer when I might be able to help. Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes. Clara, I can't ask you to risk everything for us. You're not asking, I'm offering. She reached out and squeezed his arm gently. I've already scheduled some preliminary tests under a different name. Dr. Martinez, he's an old friend who runs a private clinic. He'll help us determine if I'm truly compatible. Ethan ran his hands through his hair, overwhelmed by her offer. This is too much. If anyone finds out, they won't, Clara assured him, though her own voice wavered slightly. The tests will be completely off the books. The next morning, Clara sat in Dr. Martinez's clinic, rolling up her sleeve for the first round of blood work. The small office was warm and quiet, nothing like the bustling hospital where she worked. Dr. Martinez, a kind-faced man in his 50s, worked efficiently as he drew several vials of blood. This is quite a risk you're taking, he murmured as he labeled the samples. Clara watched the dark red liquid fill each tube. Sometimes doing the right thing means taking risks. Over the next few days, Clara underwent more tests while maintaining her regular shifts at the hospital. Each morning, she arrived early to check her results with Dr. Martinez before heading to work. The waiting was excruciating, but she kept herself busy by focusing on her patients. Ethan struggled with his own demons during this time. Every time he saw Clara at the hospital, guilt gnawed at his conscience. She'd become thinner, more tired-looking, and he knew it was because she was spending her free time at the clinic, undergoing test after test. One afternoon, he caught her in the break room. You look exhausted, he said quietly. Clara managed a small smile. I'm fine, really. No, you're not. Ethan's voice was rough with emotion. You're wearing yourself out for us, and I hate seeing it. This isn't your burden to carry. Ethan, Clara said firmly, stop thinking of it as a burden. This is my choice. She glanced around to make sure they were alone before continuing in a whisper. The initial results are promising. My blood type matches, and the genetic markers are close enough. We just need a few more tests to confirm everything. Tears threatened to spill from Ethan's eyes. Why are you doing this? Clara's expression softened. Because every time I see Lily smile, I'm reminded of why I became a nurse in the first place. Because sometimes faith means taking action, even when it's scary. A week later, Clara sat in Dr. Martinez's office again, this time preparing for the actual donation. She'd changed into a comfortable sweater and loose pants, trying to calm her racing heart. The final test results had confirmed she was a viable donor. Dr. Martinez entered with his equipment, his face serious. "Last chance to change your mind, Clara." She shook her head, rolling up her sleeve. No turning back now. As he prepared the needle, Clara closed her eyes and thought of Lily's bright smile, of Ethan's unwavering dedication to his daughter. She thought of her brother James, and how his gift of blood donation had continued to save lives even after his death. For Lily, she whispered to herself as the needle slipped into her arm, beginning the process that could save a little girl's life, or cost Clara everything she'd worked for. Author's note, ending here as per instructions, leaving the scene at Clara, beginning the donation process with her whispered words, "For Lily." The monitor's steady beeping filled the hospital room as Lily lay in her bed, her small frame looking even tinier against the white sheets. Her face, usually bright with childlike enthusiasm, had grown pale and drawn. Ethan sat beside her, his calloused hand gentle as he brushed her hair back from her forehead. "Daddy?" Lily's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't feel so good." "I know, sweetheart." Ethan's voice cracked as he tried to stay strong for his daughter. "Just rest, okay?" Clara stood in the doorway, her heart heavy as she watched them. The chart in her hand showed what they'd all feared. Lily's blood counts were dropping rapidly. The experimental treatment that had given them so much hope was failing. Dr. Patel entered the room, his face grave. "Mr. Moore, could we speak outside for a moment?" Ethan kissed Lily's forehead. "I'll be right back, princess." In the hallway, Dr. Patel didn't waste time with pleasantries. "The treatment isn't working anymore. Her body is rejecting it." He showed them the latest test results. "Her immune system is crashing. We need to find a new solution, and fast." Clara felt her chest tighten. All their careful planning, all their hopes, crumbling before their eyes. "But why?" she asked. "The treatment was working so well." "Sometimes the body builds up resistance, Doctor," Patel explained. "The blood we've been using, it's lost its effectiveness. We need a fresh donor match." Or, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Ethan leaned against the wall, his shoulders slumping. "How long?" he managed to ask. "Without a new match? Days. Maybe less." "Doctor?" Patel's words fell like stones in the quiet hallway. "If we can't stabilize her soon, she could slip into a coma." Clara watched as Ethan's face crumpled. She wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but her professional boundaries held her back. Instead, she clutched her clipboard tighter, her knuckles white with tension. Back in Lily's room, the little girl had drifted into a fitful sleep. The shadows under her eyes looked darker against her pale skin. Clara checked her vital signs, each number on the monitor a reminder of their failing efforts. "I thought we had more time," Ethan whispered, more to himself than to Clara. He sat heavily in the chair beside Lily's bed. I really thought, we were going to beat this." Clara adjusted Lily's IV line, her movements mechanical while her mind raced. All her research, all the risks she'd taken, they seemed meaningless now. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," she said softly. "I really thought we could help." Through the window, the afternoon sun cast warm patches on the hospital floor, a cruel contrast to the coldness they all felt inside. Lily stirred in her sleep, her small hand twitching on the blanket. Ethan immediately reached for it, holding it gently between his own. "Remember when she was born?" he said suddenly, his voice thick with emotion. "She was so tiny, but she had such strong lungs. The nurses said they'd never heard such a loud cry from such a small baby." He smiled at the memory, but it was tinged with sadness. Her mother used to say that meant she was a fighter. Clara blinked back tears as she watched them. She'd seen countless patients come and go, but something about Lily and Ethan had touched her heart in a way she couldn't explain. Maybe it was Ethan's unwavering dedication, or Lily's bright spirit despite her illness. Whatever it was, their pain had become her pain. The afternoon wore on, marked by the steady rhythm of the monitors and the quiet bustle of hospital staff outside. Clara made her rounds, checking on other patients, but her thoughts kept returning to room 304, to the little girl fighting for her life, and the father who would move mountains to save her. When she returned later, she found Ethan still in the same position, holding Lily's hand. His other hand held a worn photo. Clara caught a glimpse of a smiling woman with Lily's eyes before Ethan tucked it back into his wallet. "She looks so much like her mother," he said quietly. "Sometimes it hurts to look at her, but then I think about how blessed I am to have this piece of Sarah still with me." His voice broke on his late wife's name. Clara checked Lily's vitals again, her heart sinking at the numbers. They were still dropping, slowly but steadily. She adjusted the blanket around Lily's shoulders, a gesture that felt inadequate in the face of such overwhelming odds. The setting sun painted the room in shades of orange and gold. Ethan hadn't moved from his vigil, his eyes fixed on Lily's face, as if he could will her better through sheer determination. Clara stood at the foot of the bed, feeling helpless and defeated. "I keep thinking about all those mornings at the donation center," Ethan said softly. "How something so simple as giving blood could keep her alive. And now—" He trailed off, unable to finish. Clara watched as he gently squeezed Lily's hand, his thumb running over her small knuckles. The gesture was so tender, so full of love, that Clara had to turn away to hide her tears. As she stepped back into the hallway, Clara found herself walking toward the hospital chapel. She wasn't particularly religious, but something drew her there. Perhaps the need for hope, for answers, for some kind of miracle. In the quiet of the chapel, Clara sank into a pew, her head bowed. Behind her, she could hear Ethan's footsteps. He must have followed her. He sat in a pew across the aisle, his head also bowed in prayer. The chapel was silent except for their quiet breathing and the distant sounds of the hospital. Through the stained glass windows, the last rays of sunlight created patterns on the floor, like nature's own attempt at comfort. Back in Lily's room, the monitors continued their vigil, marking each precious heartbeat. Ethan returned to his post beside her bed, holding her small hand in his, while Clara stood in the doorway, her own silent prayers joining his in the growing darkness. The hospital corridors were quiet in the early morning hours as Clara made her way through the dimly lit hallways. She hadn't slept more than an hour, her mind racing with thoughts of Lily's deteriorating condition. Her scrubs felt heavy on her shoulders, but her steps were determined as she headed toward Dr. Patel's office. The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Clara's hand hesitated for a moment before knocking on Dr. Patel's door. "Come in," his voice called from inside. Dr. Patel sat at his desk, reviewing patient files. He looked up as Clara entered, noting the dark circles under her eyes and her worried expression. "Clara, you're here early." "Doctor Patel, I need to talk to you about Lily more." Clara closed the door behind her and took a seat across from him. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. "I think I might have a solution." Dr. Patel leaned forward, his expression curious but cautious. "Go on, my brother." Clara's voice caught slightly. "Before he died, he was a regular donor here. His blood type matches Lily's, and I've been going through the old records. The antibodies in his donations were used in the initial trials that helped her." "Doctor?" Patel's eyes widened with understanding. "And you think I might be a match?" Clara finished. "We shared the same blood type, and given the genetic connection, there's a possibility I could help." The doctor sat back in his chair, considering her words carefully. "Clara, you understand the implications of what you're suggesting? This would be highly unusual, and there could be professional consequences." "I know," Clara nodded, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But we're running out of options, and Lily's running out of time." In the hallway outside Lily's room, Clara found Ethan slumped in a chair, his head in his hands. She approached him quietly, touching his shoulder. He looked up, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "Ethan, can we talk?" They moved to the small hospital garden, where the morning air was crisp and clean. A few early birds chirped in the distance as Clara explained her plan. "Your brother's blood?" Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. "And you think you could be a match?" "There's a good chance," Clara said, watching his face carefully. "Dr. Patel is willing to run the tests. We could know within days." Ethan shook his head, his shoulders tense. "Clara, I can't ask you to do this. You could lose your job." "You're not asking," she said firmly. "I'm offering, and sometimes—" She paused, looking at the growing light in the sky. "Sometimes doing the right thing means taking a risk." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, understanding, gratitude, and something deeper neither was ready to name. Ethan's hand found hers, squeezing it gently. "Why?" he asked softly. "Why would you do this for us?" Clara's smile was gentle. Because every time I see you with Lily, I'm reminded of why I became a nurse in the first place. It wasn't about following rules. It was about helping people, really helping them. Later that morning, Clara sat in the hospital lab as a technician drew her blood for testing. The needle pinched, but she barely noticed. Her mind was on Lily, on Ethan, on all the possibilities that hung in the balance. Through the lab's window, she could see Ethan pacing in the hallway. He'd insisted on waiting, even though she'd told him it would take hours to get preliminary results. When the technician finished, Clara pressed a cotton ball to her arm and stood up. "We'll rush these," the technician assured her. Dr. Patel marked them as priority. Clara nodded, then stepped out into the hallway. Ethan stopped pacing and looked at her questioningly. "Now we wait," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his anxiety. "Clara, if this works, let's just take it one step at a time," she said gently. "We'll know soon enough if I'm a match." She gathered her things, preparing to head back to her regular duties. As she turned to leave, Ethan caught her arm. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just thank you." Clara smiled, patting his hand before walking away. Her steps echoed down the corridor as she left the lab, carrying with her both the weight of uncertainty and the lightness of hope. Ethan watched her go, standing motionless in the hallway, his heart caught between fear and gratitude as he waited for news that could change everything. Clara sat in Dr. Patel's office, her hands trembling slightly as she held the test results. The morning light streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on the paper that could change everything. Dr. Patel leaned forward in his chair, his expression serious but kind. "As you can see, Clara, you're a partial match," he explained, pointing to the highlighted sections. "The genetic markers from your brother's donations align with what we need. However," he paused, making sure she was following, "there are significant risks we need to discuss." Clara nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "I understand. What kind of risks?" "The donation process would be more intensive than standard procedures. We'd need to harvest specific components of your blood over multiple sessions. There could be side effects, fatigue, dizziness, potential complications." The office felt smaller as Dr. Patel continued explaining the medical details. Clara listened intently, her medical training helping her process the information while her heart raced with both hope and anxiety. "We'll need to run additional screening tests, Doctor," Patel concluded, "and you'll need to sign extensive waivers. The hospital won't proceed without thorough documentation." "How long will the additional screening take?" Clara asked, thinking of Lily's deteriorating condition. 3 days, minimum. We can't rush this part, Clara. Your safety matters too." Clara found Ethan in the hospital cafeteria, stirring a cold cup of coffee. His face brightened when he saw her, then fell slightly as he noticed her serious expression. "I'm a match," she said, sitting across from him. "A partial match, but enough to potentially help Lily." Ethan's coffee cup clattered against the table as his hand shook. "Really? That's amazing." His relief was visible, but concern quickly clouded his features. "But what about the risks?" "There have to be risks." Clara explained everything, Doctor. Patel had told her, watching as Ethan's expression grew more troubled with each detail. When she finished, he reached across the table and grabbed her hand. "Clara, I can't let you do this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It's too dangerous. If something happened to you, it's not your decision to make," Clara said gently, squeezing his hand. "I know the risks. I've thought about this more than you know." "But why?" Ethan's eyes searched hers. "Why would you put yourself through this?" Clara looked down at their joined hands, gathering her thoughts. "When my brother died, I felt helpless. I couldn't save him. But now, with Lily," she took a deep breath, "I can actually do something, make a difference. How could I not try?" They sat in silence for a moment, the bustling cafeteria fading into background noise. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared, Clara. Not just for Lily anymore, but for you too." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. "Can I tell you something?" She waited for his nod. "I'm terrified. What if it doesn't work? What if I go through all this and still can't help her? I keep thinking about my brother, about Lily, about everything that could go wrong." Her voice broke, and Ethan moved to sit beside her, his arm coming around her shoulders. "Hey," he said softly, You're the strongest person I know. You've been fighting for us since the beginning, even when it could cost you everything." Clara leaned into his warmth, allowing herself this moment of vulnerability. "I don't feel strong right now." "That's what makes you even stronger," Ethan said. "You're scared, but you're doing it anyway. That's real courage." The following morning, Clara stood in the pre-op room, changing into a hospital gown. The irony wasn't lost on her. How many times had she helped patients into these same gowns? Now she was on the other side. She could hear movement in the hallway outside, nurses preparing, doctors reviewing procedures. Her colleagues, now her caregivers. She took deep breaths, trying to center herself. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Clara?" It was Ethan. "Can I come in?" "Yes," she called, adjusting her gown one last time. Ethan entered, looking as nervous as she felt. He carried something in his hands, a small, folded piece of paper. "Lily made this for you," he said, handing it to her. "She wanted you to have it before everything starts." Clara unfolded the paper to find a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands. A tall man, a woman in what looked like nurse's scrubs, and a small girl with a big smile. Across the top, in wobbly letters, "Thank you for helping me." The tears she'd been holding back all morning finally spilled over. Ethan stepped forward, pulling her into a gentle hug. "You don't have to do this," he whispered against her hair. Clara pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Yes, I do." She looked down at the drawing again. "But I'm glad I'm not doing it alone." The orderly arrived to take her to the operating room. As they wheeled her bed down the hallway, Ethan walked alongside, holding her hand until they reached the doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only." "I'll be right here," he promised, squeezing her hand one last time. Clara watched him through the small window as the doors closed between them. He stood there, one hand pressed against the glass, his lips moving in what she knew was a prayer. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and prepared herself for what was to come. The steady beep of medical equipment filled the small hospital room as Clara lay back against the stark white pillows. The donation equipment hummed quietly beside her bed, its tubes carefully connected to her arm. Ethan sat in the chair next to her, his warm hand gently holding hers. The morning sunlight filtered through the half-drawn blinds, casting thin stripes of gold across the sterile floor. "Are you comfortable?" Ethan asked, his voice soft with concern. His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. Clara managed a small smile. "As comfortable as I can be with needles in my arm." She tried to keep her voice light, but her eyes betrayed her nervousness. Dr. Patel entered the room, checking the equipment readings. "Everything looks good so far, Clara. We'll be collecting the specific blood components we need over the next few hours. Just try to relax." Clara nodded, her medical training helping her understand each step of the process. Still, being on this side of the procedure felt strange and somewhat frightening. She watched as her blood moved through the clear tubes, knowing that each drop could help save Lily's life. "Tell me about Lily," Clara said, needing a distraction from the slow process. "What was she like as a baby?" Ethan's face softened at the memory. "She was the happiest baby you'd ever seen, always smiling, even when she was sick. Sarah, my wife, used to say she got that from me, but I know she got it from her mother." As he spoke about Lily's early years, Clara noticed how his whole demeanor changed. The worry lines around his eyes smoothed out, replaced by laugh lines as he shared stories about Lily's first steps and her favorite stuffed giraffe that she still kept on her bed. Hours passed slowly. The medical team came and went, checking Clara's vital signs and adjusting equipment as needed. By early afternoon, Clara's energy had begun to fade. Her skin felt clammy, and the room seemed to tilt slightly when she moved her head. "Clara?" Ethan's voice was filled with concern as he noticed her pallor. "Should I get the nurse?" "I'm okay," she assured him, though her voice was weaker than before. "Just tired." "They said this would happen." Dr. Patel returned, reviewing the collection progress. "We've gotten what we need, Clara." "You did wonderfully." He signaled to the nurses to begin disconnecting the equipment, "But you'll need to rest for at least 24 hours. No work, no driving, and plenty of fluids." As the nurses removed the needles and applied pressure bandages, Clara felt the full weight of her exhaustion settle in. Her arms felt like lead, and even keeping her eyes open became a challenge. "Thank you," Ethan whispered, still holding her hand. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this," Clara wanted to respond, but fatigue overwhelmed her. She drifted into a light sleep, vaguely aware of Ethan's presence beside her. When she next opened her eyes, the room was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Ethan was still there, reading a magazine in the chair next to her bed. He looked up when she stirred. "Hey there," he said softly. "How are you feeling?" "Like I ran a marathon," Clara admitted, trying to sit up slightly. "Any news about Lily?" Ethan's face brightened. "They started the treatment an hour ago. Her vital signs are already showing improvement." His voice caught slightly. "The doctors are cautiously optimistic." Clara felt tears of relief prick at her eyes. "Can I see her?" "You need to rest," Ethan insisted gently. "But I took a picture." He pulled out his phone and showed her a photo of Lily sleeping peacefully in her hospital bed, some color already returning to her cheeks. "She's smiling in her sleep," Clara noticed, touching the screen gently. "That's all you," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave her that smile back." Clara lay back against her pillows, feeling weak but fulfilled. The risk had been worth it, worth every moment of discomfort and uncertainty. She watched as Ethan settled back into his chair, his presence a quiet comfort in the peaceful room. Through the window, the setting sun painted the sky in, shades of pink and gold. In another room down the hall, a little girl slept soundly, her body accepting the gift of healing that Clara had given. And in this moment, despite her exhaustion, Clara felt a profound sense of peace. She had done what she set out to do. She had made a difference. Dr. Patel studied the monitors surrounding Lily's hospital bed, his expression brightening as he made notes on his tablet. "Her white blood cell count is normalizing," he said, turning to face Ethan with a warm smile. "The transfusion appears to be working better than we hoped." Ethan stood at the foot of Lily's bed, his hands gripping the rail. Dark circles lined his eyes from countless sleepless nights, but hope had returned to his face. "Really?" His voice cracked with emotion. "Yes, doctor." Patel nodded, pointing to one of the screens. "See these numbers here? Her immune system is showing remarkable improvement. The donated blood is doing exactly what we needed it to do." Lily stirred in her sleep, her cheeks showing more color than they had in weeks. The stuffed bear Clara had given her remained tucked securely under her arm. "I need to check on Clara, doctor," Patel said, patting Ethan's shoulder. "But this is very encouraging news." After the doctor left, Ethan sank into the chair beside Lily's bed. He took her small hand in his, marveling at how much warmer it felt compared to yesterday. Tears of relief slid down his cheeks. A soft knock at the door made him look up. Sarah from his church stood there, holding a covered casserole dish. Behind her, several other familiar faces from the congregation peered in. "We brought dinner," Sarah whispered, noting Lily's sleeping form. "And there are more meals coming. The whole community wants to help." Ethan's throat tightened. "Thank you," he managed. Throughout the afternoon, a steady stream of visitors tiptoed in and out. Veterans who'd heard about Clara's donation brought cards. Neighbors dropped off care packages. Even Ethan's boss stopped by with the news that he'd arranged paid leave for as long as Ethan needed. Each act of kindness overwhelmed him. These were the same people who'd supported his fundraising efforts to save the donor program. Now they were here again, showing him that he and Lily weren't alone. Later that evening, Clara appeared in the doorway, moving slowly but determined to check on Lily. Though still pale from her donation, she brightened at the sight of the sleeping child. "The nurses told me about her improvement," she said softly, easing herself into the chair next to Ethan's. "I had to see for myself." Ethan turned to her, his eyes full of gratitude. "Clara, I don't even know how to thank you. What you did." He shook his head, unable to find the right words. "You don't have to thank me," she replied, her gaze fixed on Lily. "Seeing her getting better is enough." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Lily's peaceful breathing. The room had grown dim as evening settled in, with only the soft glow of medical monitors providing light. "You know," Ethan said quietly, "when my wife died, I thought I'd never feel hope again. Every day was just about surviving, trying to keep Lily alive." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But what you did, risking everything to help us, it showed me that there's still so much good in the world." Clara reached over and squeezed his hand. "You showed me that too, Ethan. Your dedication to Lily, coming week after week to donate, never giving up. That's what inspired me to help." Their eyes met in the dim light, a moment of understanding passing between them. They'd both fought this battle, Ethan with his weekly donations, Clara with her sacrifice, all for the little girl sleeping peacefully before them. Lily stirred then, her eyes fluttering open. "Daddy?" she murmured. "I'm here, sweetheart," Ethan said, leaning forward. "Miss Clara too?" Lily smiled sleepily when she spotted the nurse. "Yes, I'm here too, Clara," answered, her voice gentle. "Good." Lily sighed contentedly, already drifting back to sleep. "Stay." Ethan and Clara exchanged glances, both smiling at Lily's simple request. In that quiet moment, as they watched over Lily together, they felt the depth of their connection, one forged through shared worry, hope, and finally, triumph. No words were needed to express what they both understood. They'd become something more than nurse and donor, more than friends even. Their bond had been sealed in blood and sacrifice, in their mutual love for this brave little girl. The monitors continued their steady beeping, a reassuring rhythm that told them Lily was healing. Outside the window, the sun had set, but stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. It felt like a new beginning, though neither of them spoke it aloud. They simply sat together, grateful for this moment of peace, for Lily's improving health, and for the unexpected gift of finding each other through it all. Clara's phone buzzed during her lunch break. The hospital board's number flashed across the screen, making her stomach tighten. She stepped away from the cafeteria table and found a quiet corner near the window. "Hello, this is Clara Benson. Miss Benson, this is Margaret from the board." The voice was clipped and formal. "We need to inform you about some developments regarding the donor program." Clara's fingers tightened around her phone. "Yes?" "Despite recent successes, particularly with the Moore case, we're facing severe budget constraints. The board has voted to phase out the donor program over the next few weeks." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She steadied herself against the wall, her free hand pressing against the cool surface. "But the program is working. We've seen incredible results with Lily." "One success story isn't enough to justify the operational costs, Miss Benson. We're already running at a deficit." After the call ended, Clara stood motionless, watching. People walked past the hospital windows, parents holding children's hands, elderly couples supporting each other, nurses rushing between buildings. Each person represented a life that could be affected by this decision. She found Ethan in Lily's room, reading a story to his daughter, who was finally strong enough to sit up and smile. The sight of them together made the news even harder to bear. She waited until Lily dozed off before gesturing for Ethan to join her in the hallway. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked immediately, noting her expression. "Is it about Lily's tests?" Clara shook her head, leading him to a quiet corner near the nurse's station. The board called. "They're shutting down the donor program." The color drained from Ethan's face. "But Lily, she's getting better." "The treatment is working." "I know." Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. "They're saying it's too expensive to maintain. Budget cuts." Ethan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Clara had come to recognize as a sign of his distress. "How can they do this?" "There are other kids who need help, just like Lily. They don't see the human cost," Clara said. "They only see numbers on a spreadsheet. There has to be something we can do." Ethan's voice carried the same determination she'd heard when he first started his blood donations. "We can't just let them shut it down." Clara hesitated, then said, "I've been thinking. Maybe we need to make this bigger than just us. The community showed up for the fundraiser, they might show up again." "You mean like a protest?" "More than that. We need to show them what this program means to real people. Your story, Lily's story, it could make a difference." Ethan paced the small space, his shoulders tense. "I don't know, Clara. Going public could backfire. What if they retaliate? Your job, my job doesn't matter if we can't help people who need it." The words came out more forcefully than she intended, and their eyes met in a moment of shared understanding. A nurse walked past, and they both fell silent till she was gone. Clara could feel the weight of what she was suggesting. It wasn't just about organizing a protest, it was about challenging the entire system. "What exactly are you thinking?" Ethan finally asked. "We start with the local news, share Lily's story. Then we organize a peaceful demonstration outside the hospital, show them how many lives are affected by this program." Ethan leaned against the wall, his expression troubled. "I want to fight this, Clara. I do, but—" He glanced toward Lily's room. "I can't risk her treatment." Clara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "We'll be careful. We'll do this right." The space between them seemed to crackle with unspoken words. Clara could see the conflict in Ethan's eyes, feel the tension in his stance. Their relationship had grown beyond nurse and patient, beyond even friends, but neither of them had dared to name what was developing between them. "Okay, Ethan said finally. But we need to be smart about this, strategic. They walked together to the hospital entrance, stepping out into the late afternoon Sunday. The building loomed before them, its windows reflecting the golden light. Clara remembered her first day working here, how proud she'd been to be part of something that helped people. Ethan stood beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "It's strange," he said, looking up at the building. "A year ago, this place just meant bills I couldn't pay. Now it's hope," Clara finished softly. They stood there in silence, both aware of how much was at stake. The hospital had become more than just a building to them. It was where Lily was healing, where Clara had found her purpose, where their lives had intertwined in unexpected ways. "We'll figure this out," Clara said, more to herself than to Ethan. "We have to." The morning sun cast long shadows across the hospital parking lot as Ethan helped set up a folding table near the main entrance. His hands trembled slightly as he arranged stacks of flyers, but his jaw was set with determination. Clara stood beside him, pinning on a small badge that read, "Save Our Blood Donor Program." People began trickling in, first just a handful, then dozens. Veterans in their military caps arrived, some using canes or wheelchairs. Young mothers pushed strollers. Hospital staff on their breaks joined the growing crowd, their scrubs adding splashes of blue and green to the gathering. "I didn't expect this many people," Ethan whispered to Clara, his voice thick with emotion. She squeezed his arm. "You inspired them, Ethan. They're here because of your story." The crowd swelled to over 100 people. Some carried handmade signs, "Blood Saves Lives," and "Keep Hope Flowing." A group of veterans had organized themselves near the front, their weathered faces serious, as they held up a banner listing the names of soldiers whose lives had been saved by blood donations. Local news vans pulled into the parking lot, their satellite dishes extending skyward. Reporters with microphones and cameras began working their way through the crowd, gathering stories. "Mr. Moore?" A reporter approached Ethan. "Could you tell us why you're here today?" Ethan glanced at Clara, who nodded encouragingly. He cleared his throat. "I'm here because this program saved my daughter's life, and it's saving others too. We can't let it end." More cameras gathered around him as he spoke about his weekly donations, about discovering that his own blood had been helping Lily. His voice grew stronger with each word. Clara watched from nearby, her heart swelling with pride. She saw the hospital director peek through the blinds of his second-floor office, his face tight with concern. "Nurse Benson?" Someone touched her arm. It was Dr. Patel. "Would you speak to the crowd? They need to hear from someone who knows the program from the inside." Clara hesitated, knowing she was risking her job. But looking at the faces in the crowd, the parents, the patients, the veterans, she knew she had to try. She stepped up to the makeshift podium they'd arranged. Her hands shook as she adjusted the microphone, but when she began speaking, her voice was clear and steady. "I've worked in this hospital for 8 years," she began. "I've seen firsthand what this program means to families. It's not just about blood, it's about hope. It's about community. It's about saying that every life matters." The crowd grew silent, hanging on her words. She saw tears in some eyes, nods of understanding from others. "My own brother was a donor before he passed away," she continued, her voice catching slightly. "His donations helped create the foundation for treatments that are saving lives today. Every time I see a patient recover because of this program, I think of him. His gift lives on." In his office, the hospital director paced, phone pressed to his ear. Through the window, Clara could see him gesturing animatedly, his face reddening as he spoke to someone. The protest continued through the morning. People shared stories of how blood donations had touched their lives. A young cancer survivor spoke about the transfusions that had kept her alive during chemotherapy. A veteran described waking up in a field hospital, alive only because of donated blood. News cameras captured it all. Social media lit up with pictures and videos from the protest. Numbers Save Our Donors started trending locally. Around noon, Ethan noticed Lily's doctor in the crowd. The physician made his way forward, asking to speak. His voice shook with emotion as he described watching children recover thanks to the program's treatments. "This isn't about numbers on a spreadsheet," the doctor said. "This is about giving people a chance to live." Clara watched the hospital director make another appearance at his window. This time, his expression was different, less angry, more contemplative. He stood there for a long moment, watching the crowd below. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan found a quiet moment with Clara behind the information table. They watched as more people arrived, bringing food and water for the protesters. Look at all these people, Ethan said softly. I never thought. Clara smiled, understanding what he couldn't put into words. They believe in what we're fighting for. They understand what's at stake. A small cheer went up from the crowd as another group arrived, nurses from the pediatric ward, still in their scrubs, joining the protest during their break. We're making a difference, Clara said, watching as more people signed the petition they'd started. They can't ignore this many voices. Ethan nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything, for being here, for helping us fight. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their peaceful revolution unfold. The afternoon sun painted the scene in warm, golden light, highlighting the faces of determination, hope, and solidarity in the crowd before them. The protest had become more than just a fight to save a program. It had become a testament to the power of community, to the strength that comes from standing together. As Ethan and Clara watched, they knew that whatever came next, they had already achieved something remarkable. The clock on Ethan's bedside table read 11:42 p.m. when his phone buzzed. He fumbled for it in the dark, his heart racing when he saw the hospital's number. Late-night calls were never good news. Mr. Moore? The voice was crisp, professional. This is Dr. Matthews from the hospital board. Ethan sat up straight, fully awake now. Yes? I'm calling to inform you that effective tomorrow morning, we'll be temporarily suspending the blood donor program for reevaluation. The board has raised some safety concerns that need to be addressed. The words hit him like a physical blow. Ethan's free hand gripped the edge of his mattress. But what about the ongoing treatments? What about my daughter? Current patients will be transferred to standard care protocols while we conduct our review. The doctor's voice remained detached, clinical. We understand this may cause some inconvenience. Inconvenience? Ethan's voice cracked. This is my daughter's life we're talking about. Mr. Moore, I assure you, the board takes these matters very seriously. We'll be sending detailed information about alternative treatment options in the morning. After the call ended, Ethan sat in the darkness, his phone still clutched in his trembling hand. All those weeks of campaigning, the protests, the community support, it felt like it was crumbling away. He got up and walked to Lily's room, needing to see her. She slept peacefully, her chest rising and falling in steady breaths. The moonlight through her window cast a soft glow on her face, making her look even more fragile than usual. Ethan's throat tightened as he watched her. He reached for his phone again, this time dialing Clara's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy with sleep. They're suspending the program, he said without preamble. Tomorrow morning. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. What? They can't do that. They're calling it a safety review. Ethan's voice was bitter. Doctor? Matthews just called. Give me an hour, Clara said firmly. I'm making some calls. True to her word, Clara spent the next several hours reaching out to every contact she had. She called local news stations, leaving urgent messages about the story. She emailed city council members and state representatives. By dawn, she had compiled a list of influential people who might be able to help. Ethan met her at the hospital early the next morning. Clara looked tired but determined, her usually neat hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. She handed him a coffee and a stack of papers. These are all the safety studies showing the success of the program, she explained. The board can't just ignore scientific evidence. They sat in the hospital cafeteria, planning their next moves. Clara's phone kept buzzing with responses from her late-night campaign. A local news reporter wanted to do an interview. A state representative's office had promised to look into the situation. We're not giving up, Clara said, reaching across the table to squeeze Ethan's hand. We've come too far. Ethan looked at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of her touch spread through him. I don't know what I'd do without you in this fight, he admitted quietly. Clara's eyes softened. You're not alone in this, Ethan. You never were. Throughout the day, they worked tirelessly. Clara coordinated with sympathetic staff members while Ethan spoke to other parents in the program. The hospital halls buzzed with tension and whispered conversations. By evening, exhaustion had set in. Ethan sat in the chair beside Lily's bed, watching her color the picture of a rainbow. She seemed oblivious to the storm brewing around her, humming softly as she worked. Is Clara coming to visit today? Lily asked, reaching for a blue crayon. Soon, Ethan promised, his heart aching. Clara had become such a constant presence in their lives, bringing light and hope even in the darkest moments. When Lily finally fell asleep, Ethan remained in his chair, watching her peaceful face. The moon cast the same gentle light as the night before, but now it felt like a spotlight on everything he stood to lose. He leaned closer to his daughter's bed, his voice barely a whisper. "I won't let them take away your future." The promise felt heavy on his lips, but he meant every word. Whatever it took, he would find a way to keep that promise. The sound of quiet footsteps made him look up. Clara stood in the doorway, her face showing the same determination he felt in his heart. Without a word, she came to stand beside him, her hand finding his shoulder in silent support as they watched Lily sleep. Clara sat at her kitchen table, staring at her untouched morning coffee. The news of the program's suspension had left her feeling hollow. A gentle knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. When she opened it, Dr. Patel stood there, his usual calm demeanor tinged with concern. "May I come in?" he asked, holding a thick manila folder under his arm. "Of course." Clara stepped aside, surprised by his unexpected visit. "I was just having coffee. Would you like some?" "No, thank you." Dr. Patel settled into a chair at her kitchen table. "I heard about the suspension, but I think there might be a way to fight this." Clara's heart quickened. She sat down across from him, pushing her coffee mug aside. "What do you mean?" Dr. Patel opened the folder, spreading several documents across the table. "The hospital can't simply terminate a program that's actively saving lives without proper cause. It's not just unethical, it could be illegal." "A lawsuit?" Clara's voice wavered. The idea seemed overwhelming. "Precisely." Dr. Patel pointed to specific passages in the documents. "Look here. The hospital has a legal obligation to maintain life-saving treatments unless there are legitimate safety concerns or financial impossibilities. Neither applies in this case." Clara studied the papers, her medical training helping her understand the technical language. "But wouldn't this put all our jobs at risk?" "Sometimes we have to risk everything to do what's right," Dr. Patel said quietly. "I've already spoken with a healthcare attorney who's willing to take the case pro bono." Clara reached for her phone. "I should call Ethan." 20 minutes later, Ethan arrived, looking tired but determined. His face fell when Dr. Patel explained the proposal. "A lawsuit?" Ethan shook his head. "That feels like declaring war. What if it backfires? What if they completely shut down the program in retaliation?" "They legally can't do that while the case is pending," Dr. Patel explained. "And public opinion would be on our side. Think about it, a hospital terminating treatment for sick children? The media would have a field day." Clara watched Ethan's face as he processed this. She could see his internal struggle, the desire to fight versus the fear of making things worse. "Ethan," she said softly, "I know it's scary, but we've tried everything else. The protests, the community outreach, the fundraising, none of it was enough to change their minds. This might be our only chance." Ethan ran his hands through his hair. "What about Lily? How would this affect her treatment?" "The lawsuit would include an emergency injunction," Dr. Patel explained. "It would force the hospital to maintain current treatments while the case is pending. Lily wouldn't lose access to care." Clara reached across the table and touched Ethan's hand. "We're not just fighting for Lily anymore. There are other children who need this program too. Future patients who deserve a chance." Ethan looked at their joined hands, then met Clara's eyes. Something shifted in his expression. "Okay," he said finally. "What do we need to do?" They spent the next hour reviewing documents and planning their strategy. Dr. Patel explained that they needed to gather testimonials from patients' families, medical evidence of the program's success, and financial records showing its sustainability. "The key," Dr. Patel emphasized, "is to prove that the board's decision was arbitrary and potentially harmful to patients. We need to show that the safety concerns they cited are unfounded." Clara began making notes. "I can pull together the medical data, and I know several nurses who would testify about the program's positive impact. I can talk to the other parents," Ethan offered. "Many of them have been through similar struggles with their kids. They'd want to help." As they continued planning, Clara felt a surge of hope. This wasn't just about saving a program anymore. It was about standing up for what was right. Later that evening, after Dr. Patel had left, Clara and Ethan sat in the quiet hospital waiting room. The same room where they'd first started to know each other, where they'd shared countless conversations about hope and healing. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You could lose your job." Clara nodded, her resolve firm. "Some things are worth fighting for." This program, what it means for Lily and all the other patients, that's worth everything. They sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the muted sounds of the hospital. The stack of legal documents lay between them, representing both their greatest challenge and their best hope. "We should start collecting testimonials tomorrow," Clara said, making notes on her pad. "The sooner we build our case, the better." Ethan nodded, reaching for one of the documents. "I'll call the parents' support group first thing in the morning. Many of them have been asking how they can help." As they continued strategizing, their determination grew stronger. They knew the fight ahead would be difficult, but sitting there together, they felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their shared purpose, saving the program and protecting Lily's future, had created a bond between them that gave them strength. The morning newspaper's headline read, "Local hospital faces legal battle over life-saving blood donor program." Clara's hands trembled as she held the paper, seeing her name alongside Ethan's and Dr. Patel's in the article. The courthouse steps were already crowded with reporters and community members when they arrived. Ethan walked beside her, his face tight with determination. He wore his only suit, slightly wrinkled but clean, and carried a folder full of medical records and testimonials. Dr. Patel met them at the entrance, his usually calm demeanor replaced by fierce resolve. Inside the courtroom, the hospital director sat with his legal team, their expressions stern and unyielding. Clara noticed how they barely looked at Lily's photo when it was presented as evidence. Just another case number to them, not a little girl's life hanging in the balance. "The program costs exceed our budget by 30%. The hospital director testified, his voice steady and clinical. "We cannot sustain operations at a loss." He presented charts and graphs, all showing red figures and downward trends. Clara gripped the edge of her seat until her knuckles turned white. When it was her turn to testify, she walked to the stand with shaking legs but spoke with clear conviction. "This program isn't just about numbers," she said, looking directly at the judge. "I've watched children walk out of our hospital who doctors said wouldn't survive. I've seen parents cry tears of joy when their kids started responding to treatment." Her voice cracked slightly. "And I've personally witnessed how one father's dedication saved his daughter's life." Ethan's testimony came next. He stood tall, despite his exhaustion. "I used to think I was just selling my blood to buy groceries," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Then I learned that my donations were keeping my daughter alive. How do you put a price on that?" During the lunch recess, Clara found Ethan sitting alone in the courthouse corridor. She sat beside him, neither speaking for a moment. Finally, she reached over and squeezed his hand. He squeezed back, drawing strength from her presence. The afternoon brought Dr. Patel's testimony. He presented medical data showing the program's success rates, speaking with the authority of decades of experience. "This program has revolutionized how we treat certain autoimmune conditions," he explained. "Terminating it would be more than a financial decision. It would be abandoning proven treatment options for our most vulnerable patients." Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered in growing numbers. Veterans who had benefited from blood donations stood alongside parents of sick children. They carried signs reading "Save our donors" and "Blood is life." Local news cameras captured it all, broadcasting their story across the state. The hospital's lawyers cross-examined each witness aggressively. They questioned Clara's professional judgment, Ethan's reliability as a donor, and Dr. Patel's cost projections. But each attack seemed to strengthen the resolve of their supporters. During the afternoon break, Clara overheard two board members whispering about public relations concerns. The coverage was affecting hospital donations, and several major donors had expressed concern about the program's closure. She shared this with Ethan and Dr. Patel, kindling a small flame of hope. The community's presence grew stronger each day of the proceedings. Church groups organized prayer circles outside the courthouse. Local businesses donated lunches to supporters. Children made cards for Lily, who had become a symbol of hope for many. Clara and Ethan spent their evenings preparing for each day's testimony, working late into the night at her kitchen table. Sometimes they talked about the case, other times they sat in comfortable silence, drawing strength from each other's presence. Their shared purpose had created a bond that went beyond their initial roles as nurse and patient's father. As the final hearing approached, tension filled the courthouse. The hospital director looked increasingly uncomfortable as more evidence of the program's positive impact emerged. Medical experts from other hospitals testified about similar successful programs, weakening the financial argument against it. On the eve of the final hearing, Clara, Ethan, and Dr. Patel gathered in the hospital chapel, the same chapel where Ethan had prayed so many times for Lily's recovery. Dr. Patel reviewed their closing statements while Clara and Ethan sat in the front pew, shoulders touching, both lost in thought about tomorrow's outcome. When they left the courthouse that evening, the setting sun cast long shadows across the steps. Clara and Ethan walked hand in hand, their fingers intertwined, both physically and emotionally supporting each other. Tomorrow would decide everything: the program's fate, Lily's treatment, and the future of countless other patients. The weight of uncertainty hung heavy in the air, but their joined hands provided an anchor of hope. Neither spoke as they walked to their cars, but their shared silence carried all their fears, hopes, and determination for the battle ahead. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Martinez cleared her throat. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she sat next to Ethan in the front row. His hand found hers, and she could feel his palm sweating. Lily sat on his other side, her small face serious but hopeful. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, Judge Martinez began, her voice firm and clear. This court finds in favor of the plaintiffs. The hospital must reinstate the blood donor program, effective immediately. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by muffled sobs and quiet cheers. Clara felt her eyes fill with tears as Ethan's grip on her hand tightened. Lily bounced in her seat, tugging at her father's sleeve. Furthermore, the judge continued, while the court recognizes the hospital's financial constraints, immediate termination of a life-saving program without proper alternative arrangements is deemed unconscionable. The hospital will have 90 days to restructure the program's funding model, during which time the current services must continue uninterrupted. Dr. Patel, sitting behind them, leaned forward and squeezed both their shoulders. Clara turned to see tears in the usually stoic doctor's eyes. As people began filing out of the courtroom, the hospital director approached them. His usual commanding presence seemed diminished, his shoulders slightly stooped. He cleared his throat and addressed Clara directly. "Nurse Benson," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "I owe you an apology. Your dedication to your patients, your willingness to risk your career to do what's right, it's exactly what this hospital should stand for." He turned to Ethan. "And Mr. Moore, your courage in fighting for your daughter and others like her has taught us all something about persistence and faith." Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Ethan stood straighter, keeping one arm around Lily as he addressed the director. "Thank you, sir," he said. "We understand the financial challenges aren't gone, but maybe now we can work together to find solutions instead of fighting each other." The director nodded, looking thoughtful. "We'll need to form a committee to oversee the restructuring. Nurse Benson, Dr. Patel, I'd like both of you to be part of it." He paused, then added, "Mr. Moore, we could use a parent representative as well." After the director left, well-wishers surrounded them. Veterans who'd been part of the original donor program clapped Ethan on the back. Parents of other children in treatment hugged Clara, thanking her through tears. Reporters called out questions, but Dr. Patel expertly shepherded them away from the crowd. When they finally made it outside, the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. Lily had fallen asleep in Ethan's arms, exhausted from the day's excitement. Clara suggested they take a moment to sit on a quiet bench in the courthouse garden. As they settled onto the bench, Lily still sleeping peacefully, Ethan turned to Clara. His eyes were red-rimmed but clear, filled with an emotion that made her breath catch. "I don't even know how to thank you," he said quietly. "When I started this fight, I was just trying to save my daughter. I never expected—" His voice broke slightly. "I never expected to find someone who would risk everything to help us." Clara looked down, at her hands, remembering all the moments that had led them here. The first time she'd noticed Ethan's weekly donations, the day she'd broken protocol to tell him about Lily's treatment, her decision to offer her own blood when things seemed darkest. "You know," she said softly, "I used to watch you come in every week, so determined, never complaining, even when I could see how tired you were. You taught me what real strength looks like." She glanced at Lily's peaceful face. "And this little warrior here, she's shown more courage than most adults I know." Ethan shifted Lily gently in his arms. "We're not done fighting," he said. "The program still needs to prove it can be financially sustainable, but for the first time since Sarah died, I feel like we're not fighting alone." Clara nodded, understanding completely. The sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers from the courthouse garden. In this quiet moment, surrounded by the beauty of early evening, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower in the sky. The challenges ahead were real. They both knew that. The program would need careful management, community support, and probably more fundraising. But right now, in this moment, they had won their most important battle. Lily would continue getting her treatments, and other families would keep receiving the help they desperately needed. A soft snore from Lily made them both smile. Clara reached over and gently brushed a strand of hair from the little girl's face, marveling at how this child had brought so many people together, inspiring them all to fight for something bigger than themselves. "We should probably get her home," Ethan whispered, careful not to wake his daughter. But he made no move to stand up yet, seemingly as reluctant as Clara to break this moment of peace and quiet reflection. They had come so far from those early days of silent observation and quiet desperation. Through countless challenges, setbacks, and moments of near defeat, they had emerged stronger, not just as individuals, but as something more, a team, a family of sorts, bound together by sacrifice and unwavering determination. The last rays of sunlight glinted off the courthouse windows as they finally stood up. Clara gathered their belongings while Ethan adjusted his hold on Lily, who barely stirred. As they walked toward the parking lot, their steps fell naturally in sync, a physical echo of the harmony they'd found in their shared struggle and triumph. Today's victory was more than just a legal decision. It was validation of every sacrifice, every risk, every moment of faith when giving up would have been easier. In the gentle quiet of the evening, surrounded by the warmth of their shared accomplishment, they had found something precious. Hope, not just for tomorrow, but for all the days to come. The morning sunlight streamed through the hospital room window, casting a warm glow on Lily's face as she sat up in bed, coloring in her favorite book. Her cheeks held a healthy pink tinge that had been missing for so long. Dr. Patel stood by her bedside, reviewing her latest test results with an approving nod. "Her numbers are remarkable," he said, looking at Ethan and Clara. "The experimental treatments are working better than we could have hoped. Her immune system is responding exactly as we wanted." Ethan's shoulders relaxed visibly as he watched his daughter. The dark circles under his eyes were still there, but they seemed less pronounced now, softened by relief and hope. Clara stood nearby, her nurse's uniform crisp and neat, having just started her shift. "Look, Daddy." Lily held up her coloring book, showing a vibrantly colored butterfly. "I used all the colors today." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. Just weeks ago, Lily had barely had the energy to hold a crayon. After Dr. Patel left, Clara checked Lily's vitals, going through her routine with practiced ease. The familiar beeping of monitors had become a comfort rather than a source of anxiety. "Your temperature is perfect today, Miss Lily," she said with a warm smile. Later that afternoon, Clara found Ethan in the hospital chapel. He sat in the last pew, his head bowed slightly. She slipped in beside him, the wooden bench creaking softly under her weight. "I keep coming here to say thank you," he said without looking up. "For Lily's recovery. For you." His voice was barely above a whisper. Clara's hand found his, and they sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The stained glass windows cast colorful patterns on the floor, and the chapel's stillness enveloped them like a warm blanket. "I never thought when I first saw you coming into the donation center that we'd end up here," Clara said softly. "You look so tired, so determined. I wanted to help, but I didn't know how." Ethan turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the journey they'd shared. "You did more than help. You fought for us when nobody else would. You risked everything." "The hospital board officially reinstated me yesterday," Clara shared, a small smile playing on her lips. "Full position, no probation." "That's wonderful," Ethan squeezed her hand. "Though they should have never suspended you in the first place. They're also expanding the donor program," Clara continued. "They're calling it the Community Health Initiative now. They want you to be part of the advisory board." Ethan's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Me? Who better?" "You understand both sides, the desperate parent and the dedicated donor. Your story could help so many others." Outside the chapel, the hospital bustled with its usual activity, but in here, time seemed to slow down. They sat together, sharing the weight of all they'd been through and the lightness of where they were now. "I've been thinking about ways to help other families," Ethan said. "Maybe starting a support group for parents going through similar situations." The isolation is one of the hardest parts. Clara nodded, remembering how alone Ethan had looked all those months ago. That's a wonderful idea. The hospital would probably support it. Later that evening, Clara drove to Ethan and Lily's house after her shift. The small suburban home looked different now, more alive somehow. The front garden, which had been neglected during the worst of Lily's illness, showed signs of recent care. New flowers bloomed in bright bursts of color. Lily opened the door before Clara could knock, her face lighting up. "Clara, Daddy's making spaghetti!" The house smelled of garlic and tomato sauce. In the kitchen, Ethan stood at the stove, stirring a pot. He'd changed from his work clothes into casual wear, and Clara noticed how much more relaxed he looked in his own space. "Perfect timing," he said, smiling as Clara entered. "Dinner's almost ready." Lily bounced around the kitchen, setting the table with careful precision. She placed a vase of fresh daisies in the center, a touch that seemed to brighten the whole room. "Can I help with anything?" Clara asked, but Ethan shook his head. "Just sit. You've done more than enough." As they settled around the table, Clara watched Lily twirl spaghetti around her fork with the energy of a healthy child. The sight brought tears to her eyes, which she quickly blinked away. Just months ago, such a simple dinner would have been impossible. The conversation flowed easily, filled with Lily's stories about her day and plans for returning to school. Clara and Ethan exchanged glances across the table, each understanding the miracle of this ordinary moment. "Miss Jenkins says I can rejoin the choir when I go back," Lily announced, proudly between bites. "We're doing a spring concert." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Ethan said, his voice full of joy and gratitude. The evening light filtered through the kitchen windows, casting long, peaceful shadows. In this moment, they weren't a nurse, a patient, and a struggling single father. They were simply a family sharing a meal, bound together by something stronger than blood. Clara watched as Ethan helped Lily wipe sauce from her chin, the tender gesture speaking volumes about their bond. The fight for the donor program wasn't over. There would always be more families needing help, more battles to face. But right now, in this kitchen, with the smell of garlic bread and the sound of Lily's laughter, everything felt right. This was what they had fought for, not just survival, but the chance to live, to share simple moments like this. Clara felt a deep sense of peace settle over her as she passed the garlic bread to Lily, who was already asking for seconds. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees in Jefferson Park, scattering golden leaves across the winding path. Lily skipped ahead of Ethan and Clara, her purple jacket bouncing with each step as she chased a particularly colorful leaf dancing in the wind. "Look, Daddy, it's like the ones we used to collect," Lily called out, her voice strong and clear, a far cry from the whispers of her hospital days. Ethan watched his daughter with wonder, still amazed by her transformation. Her skin glowed with health, and her eyes sparkled with the kind of energy that only children possess. The sight of her running and playing without getting winded made his heart swell. Clara squeezed his hand gently. "She's really thriving, isn't she?" "Sometimes I have to remind myself this isn't a dream," Ethan admitted, his voice thick with emotion. 6 months ago, I wasn't sure if, but here she is, Clara finished for him, saving him from completing the painful thought. And here we are. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Lily collect leaves in her small hands. The morning sun painted everything in soft, warm light, making the world seem gentler. "Somehow, I had an interview yesterday," Ethan said suddenly. "At Thompson Manufacturing, they're looking for a production supervisor." Clara's eyes lit up. "Ethan, that's wonderful. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He shrugged, a small smile playing at his lips. "I didn't want to jinx it, but it went well. Really well, actually. The salary would be almost double what I'm making now, and they have excellent health benefits." "That would make such a difference," Clara said, her medical knowledge immediately calculating what this could mean for Lily's ongoing care. "For the first time in years, I'm actually thinking about the future instead of just surviving day to day," Ethan confessed. "I'm thinking about saving for Lily's college fund, maybe even buying a house someday." Clara stopped walking and turned to face him. "I'm so proud of you, Ethan. You've come so far from that exhausted dad who used to shuffle into the donation center every week." "We've all come far," he corrected her, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Clara. You know that, right?" She leaned into his touch, her eyes soft with affection. "We did it together. That's what matters." "Daddy, Clara, come see what I found." Lily's voice carried across the park, breaking their moment. They walked hand in hand toward the little girl, who was crouched near a park bench examining something on the ground. As they approached, Ethan felt a sense of peace wash over him. This simple moment, walking in the park with the two people he cared about most in the world, felt like a miracle after everything they'd been through. "You know," Clara said thoughtfully, "Doctor Patel told me yesterday that the donor program has already helped 3 other children since the restructuring. 3 families who won't have to go through what we did." Ethan nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "That makes everything worth it. All the protests, the legal battles, the stress, knowing other parents won't have to watch their children suffer." "The Lily Grace Foundation," Clara mused, using the program's new name. "It's going to keep helping people long after we're gone." They reached Lily, who proudly showed them a perfectly preserved maple leaf, its colors a brilliant mix of red and gold. "Can we take it home?" she asked, her eyes hopeful. "Of course, sweetheart," Ethan said, kneeling beside her. "We can press it in a book like Mommy used to do." Lily beamed at him, then turned to Clara. "Will you help us? You can pick out special leaves, too." Clara knelt down next to them, her eyes meeting Ethan's over Lily's head. "I'd love to," she said softly. "We can start our own collection." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. They'd been dancing around this conversation for weeks now, the possibility of becoming something more, of building a life together. "I've been thinking," Ethan started carefully, standing up and helping Clara to her feet while Lily continued her leaf hunt. "About us. About the future." Clara's breath caught slightly, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "Lily adores you," he said. "And I can't imagine our lives without you in them anymore. I know it's complicated, with our history and everything we've been through." "It's not complicated at all," Clara interrupted gently. "We've already proven we're stronger together. Everything else, we can figure it out as we go." They watched as Lily gathered more leaves, her laughter carrying on the breeze. The morning sun caught her hair, making it shine like spun gold, and Ethan was struck by how much brighter everything seemed these days. "We've got a lot to be thankful for," he said, squeezing Clara's hand. She squeezed back, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We do. And we've got so much to look forward to." They continued their walk through the park, hand in hand, watching Lily dance ahead of them. The path curved around a small pond where ducks paddled lazily in the morning light. The future stretched out before them like this path, not always straight, perhaps not always easy, but full of possibility and hope. The community center buzzed with warmth and laughter as families gathered for the first annual Lily Grace Foundation celebration. Strings of twinkling lights hung from the rafters, casting a gentle glow over the crowd below. Handmade banners decorated the walls, each one telling a different story of hope and healing. Ethan stood near the refreshment table, watching as Lily helped distribute cookies to younger children. Her cheeks were rosy with health, and her eyes sparkled with joy. She wore a pale blue dress that Clara had helped her pick out, with a matching ribbon in her hair. It struck him how different she looked from the fragile child who had spent so many days in the hospital bed. "She's really flourishing, isn't she?" Clara's soft voice came from beside him. She wore a simple sundress, her brown hair loose around her shoulders. "I can hardly believe she's the same little girl from a year ago." "Thanks to you," Ethan said quietly, his heart swelling with gratitude. "None of this would have been possible without you, Clara." Around them, dozens of families mingled and shared their stories. The donor program had grown beyond their wildest dreams, helping not just Lily, but countless other children in need. Parents who had once felt hopeless now spoke with renewed optimism about their children's futures. Dr. Patel stood at the podium, preparing to give a speech about the program's success. Even the hospital director, who had once been their greatest opponent, sat in the audience with a proud smile. The community had come together in ways no one could have predicted. "Remember when we thought we'd lost everything?" Clara asked, watching as another group of children ran past, their laughter echoing through the hall. "That day when they tried to shut down the round program?" Ethan nodded, remembering the darkness of those moments. "I was ready to give up," he admitted. "But you never did. You fought for us, for all of us, even when it seemed impossible." Clara turned to face him, her eyes soft with emotion. "I couldn't give up," she said. "Not on Lily, not on the program, and," she hesitated, "not on you." Ethan's heart quickened. They'd grown so close over the past year, sharing hopes, fears, and countless quiet moments in hospital corridors. He'd felt something growing between them, something deeper than friendship or shared purpose, but had never found the courage to acknowledge it. Clara, he began, his voice thick with emotion, I need to tell you something. She waited, patient and understanding as always. When I lost Sarah, I thought that was it for me. I thought my heart was closed forever except for Lily, he continued. But you changed everything. You fought for us, sacrificed for us, loved Lily like she was your own. Clara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Somewhere along the way, Ethan said, taking her hand in his, I fell in love with you. Not just for what you did for us, but for who you are. Your strength, your compassion, your unwavering faith in what's right. Clara squeezed his hand, a tear finally escaping down her cheek. I love you too, she whispered. Both of you. You've become my family. Ethan leaned forward, gently brushing away her tear with his thumb. Their eyes met, and in that moment, everything else seemed to fade away. He kissed her softly, tenderly. A kiss that held both gratitude for the past and promise for the future. When they parted, they found Lily watching them with a bright smile. She ran over and threw her arms around them both. Finally, she exclaimed, making them laugh. The evening continued around them, full of joy and celebration. Dr. Patel's speech moved many to tears as he described the lives that had been changed through the program. Parents shared stories of recovery and hope, while children played together, their health restored. As the celebration began to wind down, Ethan and Clara stood by the large windows overlooking the town. Lily had fallen asleep in a chair nearby, exhausted from the excitement, but wearing a contented smile. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, casting a warm glow over the community they'd helped rebuild. Clara leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder, their hands intertwined. The donor program was thriving, saving lives and bringing hope to families who had once felt hopeless. Their small community had become a model for others, showing what was possible when people came together for a greater cause. But beyond the program's success, beyond the lives saved and the battles won, something even more precious had grown. A family had been made whole again, hearts had been healed, and love had bloomed in the midst of struggle. Ethan looked at Clara, then at his sleeping daughter, and felt a profound sense of peace. They had faced the darkest of times together and emerged stronger. Now, standing here with the woman he loved and the daughter they both cherished, he knew that their future held endless possibilities. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Ethan Moore, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.